In this movie, what I would like to do is to summarize the points which are relevant for assignment 2. So what we will do today is to look at the things that I don't want you to do in your assignment 2. Okay? So these will be the things that I will not be actually marking as great ideas or great aspects of planning a unit of work. The second point that we will be focusing on is to actually see what we are aiming for. This is about reintroducing it again or talking about a framework within which I want you to embed your unit of work. I have written about it, I have demonstrated it, we've spoken about it, but it would be nice again to actually relook at it. And the third thing that I would like us to do is to actually see what I expect to see in assignment 2, which means what is it that are the key components of planning a unit of work and how they should actually be related. So first of all, let's have a look at what not to do. Now, some of the students have asked Brian while writing assignment 1 for examples of units of work. Now, as I explained in the collaborate session last week, that's sometimes not the best idea because those units of work will basically show you maybe some format or structure of how to do it, which was not as relevant for me. But very often what former examples show you is how other people went about it, which is why some people wanted to see it. But becoming a teacher and being trained as a teacher in university means that this is not a vocational training that we're engaging in, but an intellectual training. This means that I would wanted you or prefer that you actually engage intellectually in this task rather than actually reproducing what has been done in the past. And let me show you what dangers are there when you actually are given examples and do not approach them critically. Here it is. Right. When we look at a unit of work as this one here, the first thing as an examiner or as an assessor of your work, I will be looking at what is it that your unit is all about. I have a title here. I'm not that really into titles. It's not a book cover or anything. But if you want to have a title, have a title. I'm cool about it. But I'm looking at the first section of the unit of work, and there is no way I can guess what this unit is all about. Right? So I'm already confused. If we go further down, we do have description of the unit, but it doesn't really tell us what the unit will be on about. What it does say is we will be looking at the book, My Place, and students will be able to see the impact over time that I assume a European settlement had on the natural environment and or any settlement, maybe everyone's settlement, and how this has affected how we live today. So it's not very clear. We are learning that students will be able to see the impact over time that people had on the natural environment, but we still don't know what actually we will be doing in this unit of work. Then we have all these learning outcomes. We have no idea where they come from. They just are right there. Now, this person has pretty good sense of humor and says, beware of death by 1,000 outcomes. Well, that's a pretty good point, I'd say. What's not really good that he or she doesn't actually suggest to us how to avoid that problem. And here we have a pile of outcomes. We don't know where they come from, what they're doing here. I just can't really relate to it. Essential learnings, I don't really know why they are here. Then we have all of this thrown in and so on. We even have been told that this unit has some relevance to English as an ESL. I don't know how. I've got some stuff written up here, and even if it was outlined in words, I still wouldn't know where they got it from, because what I don't know is the focus of the unit. So you can see straight away that when I see people create units of work designed by replicating this particular structure, problems will happen. Now, the second thing I'll be looking at, because I have 157 of you to assess, so next thing I might look is not necessarily at this yet. This I might check later. I will look at resources. I want to see whether you had actually planned to have some resources for teaching your unit of work, because then I will see that that will give me an indication that inside of your plan I should be looking for some support systems that you have devised in order to assess students. Now, obviously, we are pretty poor in this assignment here, or in this unit of work, right? Basically, what we have is just the book. Okay, so that's not very good, is it? Now, you can actually look at this resource yourself, but at any aspect of it, I can't see, in any of its aspects, I can't see actually support. But this is a beautiful thing here. Look at this. Some of you might know that I wasn't necessarily against Bloom's taxonomy, although it is outdated and there has been critique about it in literature. And in this unit, I have to mention it, that it has been actually seen lately as an outdated method. But it's also not a method of teaching. It's just a way of saying how people could go about structuring their work, which means students. Whatever, we will not argue, because I don't really care about Bloom's taxonomy. I care here about all these beautiful things that we have underneath. Define, describe, label, match, paraphrase, restate, report. What are all these things here? What do you think? These are your tools. Aren't they wonderful? They tell you that when you create your resources or activities for your students, in order to actually get things out of your students, you should support them. And here's an entire array of things that you could actually focus on your support and develop resources that show children and students how to actually go about any of these components. Well, I cannot count one by one in this particular movie how many of them are here, but you know, as I say, it'd be well over 100. That's pretty good, isn't it? So there is something here, but it's not actually said how these aspects will connect to the focus of the unit and to the support structures that this unit is utilizing. So many good ideas, good stuff here, but no support. Learning journey journals. This doesn't say how you will be supporting. It just says, well, we will have certain things. Right, so straight away I'm very, very worried. And then when I look actually at things like this week 2, we will be doing this. We will have some assessment structures here. Some of you have them every week, and for whatever reason, now, I can't see how these things will be supported. We will be doing this, we will be doing that. Yes, okay, but some ESL students can't, or maybe many students can't. So we are in trouble here. I can't see any column here that will say how specifically students will be supported. So just to be pretty clear now, you can see what I'm looking for, or you can see when I'm unhappy. And I'm unhappy when I actually don't know what this is, right from the start, when I'm clearly in total dark, trying to find out what this unit is actually doing. So we've looked at the Nakara unit, and now let's have a look at the second point that I would like us to actually cover, which is what are we aiming actually for. So I've spoken about it in lecture 4 that you have on your data, on your Learn line, actually does say some things, or all the things I will be mentioning briefly here. So let me actually summarize what that lecture 4 actually says. It gives you a framework. It gives you a framework for thinking about how to develop inclusive learning environments. So first of all, we have to actually stress what is it that we're doing when we're teaching. And rather than having large frameworks and large discussions about it, let me say in one word, what we really want to do is to actually create an interactive environment. Because all research points out, whether we're actually working with infants, or so to speak, sort of level of infant, or we're working with 50-year-olds, interactivity is the key. right? But not interactivity seen as two people talking. This is a way of thinking of interactivity which has nothing to do with universities. Because what university and academic thought does, academic thought tries to actually discern the essential aspects of a particular activity or of a particular concept. This is called abstraction. We want to abstract the concept of interaction to the point that we can actually work with it in a quite flexible way. So as you can see, what I see interaction, and please consult lecture 4 for more detail. Interaction is not about two people talking, but it's actually about creating resources so that students can actually create an internal dialogue about how they read things and how they actually act. So how they act, you could actually, if you do reading and writing, so how they interpret how people do things and how they interpret how they should do things. Okay, so any form of action is an action of interpretation, and therefore it's a product of an internal dialogue. We need to support that internal dialogue. So when I say in my classes that I want students to learn by using their current resources, their current cognitive systems, what I mean by that is not a kind of linear model where we put on top of it. What we do as teachers, we don't add to students bricks, so to speak. These systems that children or students have are very flexible, they are networks, and what we want to do is actually challenge students and give them possibilities to actually reorganize their current cognitive systems or network, however you want to call it. Reorganize, not to put on top of it, but reorganize. As they reorganize those networks, what happens? They create richer connections between them, and consequently that results in a deeper learning. Because if you create a linear structure, sooner or later the bricks are gonna fall over. And that's what happens. We put stuff on top of children's heads, and then within a week or two or a month, students can't remember. They go into an overload. That's what linear teaching does to children, right? So let us be clear. What we want to do here is to actually create interactive conditions which allow students to look to interpret things in a different way, in a more informed way, rather than in a way they would had they not been actually in our classes. We want to challenge them so that they and give them tools to look at their thinking differently. And in that way, what we do, we stimulate the use of students' cognitive systems differently, in different ways, until they see and reorganize for themselves which ones are the best ones. Now, I have also described this model. As you can see, in a situation like this is using Phil Cormack's slides. In a situation like this, the likelihood of children creating their internal dialogue about how to do things and how to do them better and why and in what context is not very likely, is it? Now, you might think that this is no longer the model that is practiced in schools, but I'll challenge you and I would say there are variations of it. Now, Phil Cormack comes here with an example of children showing to the teacher their work, right? So they have a slate, they painted something or drew something or wrote something, the teacher says yay and nay, and we move on, right? So it's the interaction is what? Between a text and a student, and the teacher is in command to actually say good, bad, right? So what are children actually rewriting? As you know, education today didn't just emerge from nowhere. You can see that this particular situation, which might have been happening 100, 200 years ago, is actually a replica of systems of educational practices done in monasteries and in church-like institutions to the monks, where at the center of learning was not actually the teacher, right? There is no teacher here. What is actually happening, well, there is a teacher, but the teacher is not at the center, it's the text, right? Central in this model of teaching is a single text. Now, many of you will now instantly recognize that when I see units of work which say I will be reading a story to children, you can see straight away why I have a problem with that type of pedagogy, because this picture is no different than the teacher pointing, reading, showing things where the only source of knowledge is what? The text. And then children have to get it right or they'll get it wrong, and the teacher will tell them when they get it right and when they get it wrong. There's not much of critical reviewing, and definitely no aspect of creativity here involved. So I mentioned in a session I had with students last week on online that even so glorified practices like shared reading have been criticized by people who actually belong to this so-called critical pedagogy framework or field, where they say the idea of shared reading is no different than this picture you see here. Shared reading is, we've got a master, then we have children sitting around, and it's almost like like reading the Bible in church, right? I'll show you a better here model, right? Where we have that square thing here on the left is the text. Then we have the church audience, I think they call them congregation, right, sitting around. And the congregation is listening to the priest reading, engaging the congregation in a shared reading. The priest is reading it. The children interact with the book as the priest wants them to do, or congregation interacts, but interacts as per expectations, not as per students or congregations' critical evaluation. There is no other text against which they can actually evaluate how to understand the text. There's only a single source of knowledge. Students or congregation are looking at it, then they telegraph their understandings to the master, which is on the left here, and then the master tells them, or like the church priest says to them, your response was correct or your response was not correct. In fact, a lot of critical theories have mentioned that a text, in order to be received well and therefore approved by the master, doesn't have to be even understood by the children or by those who are by the listeners. It just has to be received properly. So in the church situation, the reception will be something like "Praise Lord," to be said at the right moment. It doesn't mean that people actually engaged in it. And the same with shared reading. What very often happens, but you get the right response, and you might be actually fooled. You think, oh yeah, children understood it. They said this means lion. Well, what children understood was actually how to react to your question. That doesn't mean actually that they understood how to create a story, or what's the role of the mouse, and why the mouse, and why did the author use the mouse. And you might explain it, but they didn't understand it, because actually they would have thought, well, could have been anything small. Why the mouse? Is there any actually relationship to other text that mouse was created? And why didn't they talk about some other animal or whatever? What I'm saying is that in order to understand why the author used particular things, children need to actually look at more than one source of knowledge. So that square here on the left is actually more or less like a Bible, reading everything. The entire reading process is centered on one single text, which therefore prevents critical examination and therefore creativity. In lecture 4, I have actually presented to you a model that I've drawn but I thought that it will actually help you to compare what's the alternative, and this is a kind of structure that I would like to see in your assignment too, which is the student or a group of students, what they do, they look at, they have a task, right? They have a task in which they engage, which is this one here, the text, for example. We could call it, they create a text, we could call it project. I called it a text because ultimately each project is a text in any case, so we can leave it text. Now, what students do, in order to actually create the text, they have to engage with other texts to see how things are done, to see how they can play with things. They have to learn. They have to expand their understanding of what the assessment project actually involves. By looking at one text, they not only they are not only not given a chance to understand what this project involves, they are only requested particular response. So they will produce this particular response for the teacher, but no learning is actually no learning environment is actually constructed, no critical assessment happened, and no real creativity took place. But when children actually look at different aspects, play here, compare, contrast, and so on, and see how it's relevant to their work, what happens here in a nutshell, children take information, or students take information either as in an individual work, or as collaborative students, or teams, like teams collaboratively. What they do, they examine actually what is involved in text. They pull out from it whatever is relevant to their project. So they take things from the culture, they analyze it, what's relevant, they produce a project, and they send it back to the culture for display, for comments. So what we have here instantly is a model where actually children, through projects in your classroom, they participate in the cultural field of the society, because what they do, they take information from outside and they create things in order to give it back outside to the people, right? So you've got this taking a situation where students take it out of the people and give it back to the people, and that's very important. This is, I mean, there is no it is not a chance that that systems like YouTube or Facebook actually have such a huge success, because actually people like displaying their creativity, and we should not actually be promoting any other way of being in the world, but exactly that. Take things out of the world, evaluate things critically, give children opportunity to create things, and give them the opportunity to actually display it so that they can get feedback, or they are just happy that it's out there. All right, so now we will move to the third aspect of our teaching, which is what to do.